Of the Plan B measures implemented by the government to slow the spread of Omicron, it's the introduction of COVID passes that has proven the most controversial. The legislation going to Parliament this week would require attendees at nightclubs and large events to either have been fully vaccinated or to have taken a lateral flow test. It's got a lot of backbenchers riled up. Check out this exchange between host Rachel Burden and Tory MP Marcus Fish.
The vast majority of people who are vaccinated feel that their freedoms are being impinged by others who are able to walk around and potentially be infectious and not have to demonstrate that they're not. So if you're talking about freedoms and liberties, it's the liberty to go into a pub and know that the chances of not being infected are greatly diminished because either you've shown your vaccine certification or you've shown proof of a negative LFT. What is the problem?
We live in a free society in this country, and what you've just said is exactly what we must fight against. This idea that there should be
freedom not to be infected. What about that freedom?
A papers, please society is an authoritarian state that we should all absolutely resist.
But I'll say it again. Just can you answer this for me? What about the freedom not to be infected?
Look, we are very well vaccinated in this country. It's been a great success. People have the freedom to do what they want with their own bodies and the freedom of association. And if you want to undo those things, you're not worthy of working for the BBC, in my opinion.
Well, that's quite a personal statement to make. I suppose what I'm doing is putting across the case that many of our listeners have. They don't want to go into a pub or a restaurant, a lot of them, if they don't feel safe and secure. So if you're talking about the safety of...
Don't go then. You don't tell other people what they should do with their bodies. Sorry, don't do it.
No, but the point I'm making is you're not telling someone what to do with their body other than to show they've taken a test.
Well, both of those things. You are segregating society based on an unacceptable thing. We are not a papers, please society. This is not Nazi Germany, okay?
No, I don't think it is. And I think there is a long, long way between what people are being asked to do and Nazi Germany. I don't think you can make a direct comparison.
It's the thin end of an authoritarian wedge, and that's why we will resist it.
But you are telling everyone to go and get a booster.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. But vaccine passports is a really, really dangerous step to take.
So Marcus Fish, who last week voted for a bill which allows the Home Secretary to strip people of citizenship without any notice, thinks that having to show you were vaccinated or have taken a free test to go to a nightclub is a move comparable to Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I mean, what a character. You know, he went to Winchester College, obviously comes from a very affluent family, he worked in finance, and they just sailed through life saying these kind of mad things. I thought the barb as well about the BBC presenter on Radio 5 Live, where if you say this, then you can't work for the BBC. I mean, that sounded to me, and I know this is so often stated by journalists because they love to talk about themselves. Oh, it's intimidation. That did sound quite close to intimidation of a journalist. If you ask us, he said, we're not a papers, please society. You know, we're not an authoritarian society. But as an elected politician who represents the government, I'm going to say, if you ask a certain kind of question, you shouldn't work for the public service broadcaster. That seems quite authoritarian, Marcus Fish. So what he thinks of authoritarian is things that he doesn't like. If he likes something and it's authoritarian, well, that's fine. It's not really authoritarian. And we are a papers, please society. You try and not be born in this country and apply for nationality. It costs thousands of pounds, huge amount of paperwork, or the amount of bureaucracy attendant around people who now have to apply for work visas, European nationals who previously could live and work here prior to Britain's departure from the EU. Now they have to sign documents, write papers. There's bureaucracy. Is that fascism? You know, you can't run large organizations, let alone states, without paperwork and without coordination and without certain constraints on people's liberties. And this goes back all the way to the start of this crisis. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. COVID-19 is a fundamental challenge to the conservative idea of liberty, complete absence of constraints on the individual. We have to move away from that because epidemiology doesn't work on the basis of the individual. It works on the basis of a social organism. So whatever, you know, Marcus Fish thinks or whatever I think is kind of irrelevant. We do have to act in the broader public interest. People get vaccinated, not necessarily to keep themselves safe. If you're under 18, actually a vaccine will probably make marginal difference to you. You do it for a broader social interest. And that's not just with regards to COVID, that applies generally with pathogens. So here we have quite an elegant example of a deranged idea of what liberty is. And I do find it just utterly perplexing, these people who say, we defend conservative liberties. Well, actually, you're voting to remove quite fundamental liberties around freedom of protest. You're voting to remove the right of appeal or giving people warning. Fundamentally, they're getting rid of the right of appeal of people who are dual nationals, whose citizenship you might want to remove. But you're not a bureaucratic party. You're not prone to authoritarianism. Okay, seems rather hypocritical to me. You're sort of playing a bit of a pick and mix with regards to where your values apply and don't. But you do you, Marcus Fish.
It's probably more the classical liberal idea of freedom as opposed to the conservative one, isn't it? But sort of classical liberalism now inhabits conservative parties more than it does any other parties. We've showed you a right winger disagree with vaccine passes, COVID passes. There are obviously lots of people on the left who also have their problems with it. Personally, I actually sit on the fence this time around because I think the marginal benefit of them is potentially quite low. If they're only for nightclubs, etc., is it really going to incentivize people to go get a vaccine, especially when you can also have a test, given that double vaccines don't really stop you transmitting the virus? Is it going to stop transmission in those places? That means that it did kind of make sense to me that Sajid Javid said they're going to upgrade it to being free doses or a test soon. Whether or not how effective this will be, I think, is up for debate. I personally don't really buy the argument that this is really dystopian and this is sort of like the government collecting all of this data about us, which can then be used as this sort of slippery slope to control us all, because I have a vaccine passport on my phone. It's just my NHS details that the government already have. It's actually pretty cool. I can go through my whole medical history, which is kind of interesting. That seems like actually that's empowering people. And then I show people if I've got the vaccine, so I don't have to. Well, the places I go actually often ask for a negative test anyway. Lots of nightclubs in London are currently doing that. So to me, I find the freak out over this, both from the left and from the right, a little bit perplexing.
We've got loads of pushback from it. I think there was the thing about Sajid Javid today, which is alarming, Michael, where he says we would introduce this measure and then actually we would change what it's about quite quickly.
I don't think that is alarming. I think it's the only thing that's coherent to do, because also you're saying basically instead of thinking of it as a COVID passport, you think it's a lateral flow testing pass. It's a lateral flow pass.
No, I have no.
But you get an opt out if you are vaccinated to the extent where you're quite unlikely to transmit COVID. And if you're only double vaccinated, that's not you. I'm sorry.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is I'm worried about the principle of we will introduce a pass and we will use it to rapidly expedite certain behavioural changes. I think that's quite a worrying thing. I think you need quite a set. I think you do need. I mean, they're doing it, but my point is, you had yesterday the announcement of the rollout of the booster campaign, and you got Sajid Javid saying this today. I do find that quite concerning. So I don't think policy should be made like that. And I think generally speaking, when you're referring to civil liberties, you need a bit more of analytical, rigorous, thoughtful debate. And this seems like it's being done on the hop. We weren't thinking that boosters were all important until literally the day before. And now we're saying, actually, we're going to curtail your ability to move around on the basis of whether or not you've got a booster. And I think a one-day difference between those two statements is quite scary, Michael. And I think if that, as a principle, I think that's very bad to make policy along those lines. And I think it indicates it can happen again and again and again. So again, I agree. I agree with you. I have no problem with, look, this is what we understand as vaccinated. If you haven't got a test, but you've got this, great, knock yourself out. I agree with you. But it's not good. Because also, remember, Michael, Boris Johnson thinks of himself as a certain kind of libertarian. Imagine if you got that precedent and you have PM Priti Patel. I don't think that's positive. I think you could see something actually pretty dangerous. So I understand why people have misgivings.
I just think seeing the booster as a precedent, which is over and above the passes in the first place, I don't really see that there being a qualitative difference, especially when you've got these lateral flow tests as an option. And also, they're going to give us a month or so to get these boosters. He said until everyone's had a reasonable chance to get one.
The whole country
seems fair enough to me. Yeah, or you take a lateral flow test. Yeah. I don't think they're going to implement this until January. But even if they do, then I take a lateral flow test anyway. But if I hadn't, queued up to get my booster last week, I think it's perfectly reasonable that I should take a lateral flow test before I go to a nightclub.
I've said right from the start, and I've had loads of earache for it. I've zero problems with people having to produce a negative test in order to access large indoor areas where people are socializing. I think it's entirely legitimate. I don't see any argument against it. You know, when I went to cover COP26, we had to do that every day. When I went abroad to Malta, we had to do it. It wasn't authoritarian. It meant that in both spaces, I didn't get COVID. Fantastic. But like I say, Michael, I do worry where you have that policy being made on the hoof so quickly. Boris, okay, yeah, he's a bit of a libertarian. I do wonder, Michael. I do wonder, you know, you're saying the booster, everybody has to get the booster within the next month. And that isn't even announced in Parliament. I agree, it's preferable it's announced on the telly on a Sunday night. But all of a sudden, we're going into a strange set of conventions, which is about the media and about, you know, day-to-day media management rather than actually, okay, how are we doing this on a judicious medium-term footing? Doesn't fill me with confidence.